I'm gonna go ahead and start recording now, and we'll get started here right now. Okay, so thanks everyone for attending. This is the first of my Navionics webinars for the season. Navionics started this last year, these free webinars, and had wonderful participation. And for guys like myself that don't like to keep their mouths shut and constantly talk, this was a great avenue. Today we're going to be covering the basics of mat punching. I had to learn mat punching very, very quickly. I'm a Virginia angler, and of course the first Bassmaster Open of every season is always on Toho or somewhere in Florida, because we have 2 feet of snow here, and they down there can have 70-degree weather. But I was kind of lucky in how I got introduced to mat punching. I'll explain it to you here in a second. Who I am. Like I said, I'm Chris Murphy. I'm a Bassmaster Opens pro. I also still do some select FLW Costa events. I've been fishing the minor league circuits for quite some time now. And I don't have any aspirations right now of trying to make and qualify for the elites. Hey, we just lost something there. Let's redo this. Great. Just because I think my wife would kill me at that point. I don't think she wants to travel the country right now with the 7- and 5-year-old. And for some reason, I'm getting all kinds of updates while we go on. So please bear with me while we work this out. Great. That being said, I've had a very fortunate set of circumstances that have allowed me to have sponsors that were products that I was already associated with and products that I was already using and already had a lot of faith in. So when I was asked to join the Navionics Marine Specialist team to pretty much put this kind of information out for people, it was a no-brainer. I've been using Navionics for a long time. And today's presentation on Mat Punching 101 is presented by Navionics and also by Bass Mafia Tackle. And we're going to talk a little bit about the advantages of Bass Mafia Tackle here in a short while, because their tackle systems are the best made on the planet. And particularly if you're going to be doing a lot of heavy weight punching and heavy jig flipping down in Florida, the easiest and safest way to store your tackle is going to be in a Bass Mafia bait cop, and I'll explain to you why here shortly. Let's move to the next slide, hopefully. Yeah, here we go. So today's topic, thanks for joining us. This is going to last maybe 45 minutes, and then we should have 15 minutes reserved at the end for questions. I'm going to be talking about basic setup and strategies for punching heavy matted vegetation. This is the basic class. The more in-depth or advanced class is going to be put on in at the end of February by Josh Douglas and Seth Fider. Josh is a Bassmasters Open pro who fishes, last year he fished all 3 of them. And Seth is a Bassmaster Elite Series pro. So those 2 guys are going to build on what I'm building today. I'm sure they'll cover some of the same stuff, but I think they're going to get a little bit more in depth than what I'm doing. So when we talk about mat punching basics, if anybody doesn't know what mat punching is, we're seeing up and down the East Coast, particularly with the invasion. I know on the Potomac, on the James, we have invasive hydrilla, we have invasive milfoil. We have a lot of foreign species that have been passed around that are now heavily embedded in our waterways, and we're seeing these very, very thick grass mats. Nowhere in the country is that more evident than down in Florida. Florida has hyacinth, they have reeds, they have all these shallow lakes where grass can grow from pretty much coast to coast. And these areas, when they get real thick, will hold bass. And I was very fortunate, and the person who taught me how to mat punch was Bassmaster Open's pro Rich Howes. Rich Howes won the 2013 Southern Open #1 on Lake Toho in a playoff against Daniel Lanier, and he fished the 2014 Classic at Gunnersville. And he did so by punching mats. I don't even remember how I met Rich. We've just become very good friends, and he's been very open with me about the basics of pushing this forward. So I've built on what he's taught me, and I've learned some things on my own, and I'm here to share them with you today. So first, we're going to talk about our equipment, how we set up rods and reels, the baits that I use and recommend that you use, and why. And we're going to talk about weights. Weights is going to be kind of the big question mark, because it's really all going to depend upon what the fish tell you and what the vegetation tells you. We're going to look at the different types of terrain and vegetation, like between pads and then the mats themselves, whether they're going to be containing hyacinth, whether they're going to be containing reeds, they're just like a lot of blown debris. And then we're going to talk about different ways and different things you can do while punching mats to kind of goad these fish into striking. I'm sure all of you guys, and if you don't know this, you'll know it now. Fish don't usually bite baits because they're hungry. it's usually mostly it's an aggression bite. It's a territorial bite where they're going to be, hey, something's in my face, I'm going to kill it. Sometimes it's curiosity. But I think the statistic is it's only like 10% of the time does a bass actually hit something because it's actually hungry. It usually views it as a threat, doesn't want it in its area, or it's just a reaction because it's part of their genetic makeup that if something moves by their face, they don't have hands, so they feel what things are by putting it in their mouth. And if you watch bass video, you'll see that a lot of these little subtle bites, they'll have that bait in their mouth and then spit it right out immediately. And if you're not paying attention, you're going to miss that fish. If you have a question during the presentation, please just click on the chat at the bottom of the screen at any time during this presentation. At the end of the presentation, I will go through and answer as many of those questions as I possibly can while we are sitting here talking with each other. If we run out of time, I still get to look at them, or you can go over to my Facebook page, which is just Facebook/MurphAngler. Throw that question up there, and I'll be happy to answer it for you there. All right, so let's get started. When it comes to line setup, there's absolutely no reason to ever punch heavy vegetation with anything other than heavy braid. Minimum 60 pound. I like 60 pound. I think it's still pliable enough that I can play with it, and it allows me to have some freedom of movement. But if going below that, you risk tearing a line apart or losing a fish, because these things are going to, when you do hit them, it's not just the fish you're going to be hitting, it's the fish pulling away plus all the vegetation that's around them. I like Sunline FX2. I'm not sponsored by Sunline. It's just I have a lot of confidence in their line. And I'll talk about that here in a minute. For the most part, you do not have to worry about the bass being scared off by your line. They do not see if they do see the braid, it doesn't really bother them. And you need to have the braid on there because if you got fluorocarbon, we all know that fluorocarbon is going to catch more fish than braid because it's see-through and it's got low stretch and it's got all the advantages of braid, but it doesn't have the visibility. That being said, fluorocarbon and vegetation don't mix. When you get wrapped up around like a bottom of pad stalk with fluorocarbon, it's going to break. Braided line is going to cut right through it. So if you're going to flip vegetation, whether it is from Thousand Islands all the way down to Florida, go all braid. It's going to be a reaction bite. They don't come up and take a look at your line. You got a big super metal hook sticking out of it. There's a huge, massive weight on the top of it. Trust me, they don't see your line. Another advantage of braid, there's no stretch. So the minute I apply pressure onto that rod to hoist that fish out of the nasty stuff, the line doesn't stretch first and allow that fish to kind of feel the bait, spit it out, or move a certain way, or get even deeper into that heavy brush. Your goal when you do this type of work, when you're doing mat punching, is it's violent, guys. That's really the best way to describe it. I am trying to detect that bite. I'm going to whack that bass as hard and as fast as I can, and I will even start walking back with him as I go ahead and set the hook in order to get his head up and out of that vegetation as quickly as possible, because I don't want him digging down and it just adds weight to what I'm doing. He can get tied up. The quicker I get him up, walking to the boat, the goal, if you do it perfectly, he's up, he's tail flipping, he's walking to the boat, I'm reeling him in, and I boat flip him in every single time. And with today's rods and reels, particularly the rods that I use, you're not going to snap a rod. I like dark green is the color that I like. I know there's a lot of color options out there. I just think that dark green just looks the most natural when it's going through the vegetation. The only thing you got to be, there's lots of good line out there. Power Pro makes good line. Suffix makes good line. I prefer Sunline FX2 for a couple of reasons. Number one, it doesn't bleach. If you look right here, I'm talking about bleaching. You guys know, especially in Florida, when you got high sun, or if you're doing summertime, we're fishing into Potomac and we're going to be punching some grass mats where these bass are going to be because it's cooler, and that's where the bait's going to be. That hot sun can sometimes bleach that line. When the line becomes white, now that becomes something that's extremely unnatural in that environment, and I do think the bass will see and react to that, or they will notice it and think, it'll turn them off. I like to say that when we're fishing, I'm not throwing something that is going to be exactly like a bait. I'm looking for yeses. Bass, trout, whatever species you're targeting, they're looking for yeses or they're looking for nos. So you don't need to exactly match the hatch. You just need to throw something out there that bass says, that could be, yeah, that's something I could eat. That's something that's a threat. That's something that's in my territory. What you don't want to throw out there is something that's going to make them say, I have no idea what this is. That's not natural. That's clearly not something that needs to be here. Bass are smart. Now, they're dumb compared to us, but compared to other fish, they're very intelligent. If it does start to bleach, just carry a Sharpie with you. And I prefer to either color the original color, which is like that dark green, that olive green, or red. Red is the first color that becomes invisible or no longer visible in the UV spectrum at a very shallow depth when it's going through the water columns. That's why, you know, red works. And the knot you're going to use when you are tying on anything for flipping and punching is going to be a Snell knot. There's two reasons for that. Number one, once I put pressure on that, once I set that hook and that tungsten weight sits down on the eye of the hook, it'll immediately pop that hook up so that it's going to be facing and pushing into the fish's jaw. So it's going to drastically increase my hookup ratio. Also, the way the Snell knot's actually wrapped around the shank of the hook. The knot itself does not receive any pressure when I'm fighting that fish. All of the pressure is on that hook as it goes through the eyelet, wraps around the shaft. So the shaft of that hook is basically holding on to that fish and not the knot itself. That knot's not moving around through the eyelet and getting all banged up. I've wrapped it around the shank. Now the hook is taking all the pressure. For those of you who have never tied a Snell knot, I have a wonderful little video here. This is how I learned to tie it. This is my friend, the guy who showed me how to do this stuff. Rich House. This video is taken from a Bassmaster.com video from Rich House. I'm gonna play it for you now. This is a very simple and effective way to tie a Snell.
So now I want to demonstrate the knot that I like to use. It's very important when flipping. It's called a Snell knot. So once you thread your tungsten weight on, you're going to want to use heavy braided line, 65-pound test. You're going to take your hook. You want it facing down. You're going to thread it through and go right back. So you have a loop right here. You're going to bring that around the hook, leaving a little slack. And now what you want to do is wrap the tag line around the shank of the hook. You can do that up to 5 or 6 times. You then take that tag line, go right through that loop that was formed. Then you pull the main line and cinch it down. Of course, you'll then snip off your tag line, but let me show you why this is so important.
Here's the important part, guys.
When the tungsten weight hits the hook, you can see it kicks right into the fish. And that will improve your hookup ratio tremendously.
Now, all things put aside here in the wonderful picture of this hook and of course Rich's groin, that is the simplest, easiest way that I know of to tie a Snell. And you know that it's right because you'll do this little test after it's done, and if it doesn't point directly up, then you tied it on wrong. When it comes to the hook, I use the Strike King Hack Attack flipping hook. The size that I use almost universally is a 4/0. There's a couple reasons why I like this hook. Number one, I think it's got the best bait keeper on the market. You need a solid bait keeper when you're flipping because it's a very tedious, repetitive motion where I'm constantly coming in and I'm constantly coming out. A bait keeper is essential because now I don't have to worry about my bait constantly moving off the hook. I'm spending more time throwing a solid, good presentation to potential fishing areas rather than worrying about my bait and checking the bait all the time. I'm also not going through as many baits, which is, you know, for those of us on a budget, I don't know if you can tell from my awesome clothes and my beat up hat that I've been wearing for quite some time. I don't have the money to buy 10,000 baits every day. Another big thing about this hook is that it's got a very high tensile strength. There are lots of hooks out there that I've experimented with. I have never seen a Hack Attack hook bend ever. I've never seen it leave this perfect little U where I have the 180-degree turn. I have never seen that get straightened. I've done that with other hooks. I'm not going to say what they are because I'm not here to bash any product, but the Hack Attack, for me, I've hooked trees, and when I'm done, I may have had to just take a little, my hook sharpener and sharpen this hook a little bit, and I'm right back in the game. The 4/0 is the best all around for the baits that you're going to use. Unlike other flipping applications, like if you're going to fish John Kerr Reservoir, you would want to be, almost everybody knows you flip a brush hog on that place. I don't use a flipping hook when I flip brush hogs. I will flip with a EWG 4-aught. But the 4-aught for what we're doing, we're flipping. We're using pretty specific baits that are going to be thin profile so they can fall through the vegetation without a whole lot of resistance. The 4-aught allows me to have a different variety of those types of baits without having to switch my hook or worry about it. If I go to a 5, you can do that, but it takes some of your smaller options away from you. If you go to a 3, the 3 will be able to handle everything, but as you can see here, the difference between a 5 and a 4, the gap in between is significant, and it's going to be the same for the 3. So you want to maximize this space because that's what's going to make it easy to penetrate that fish. Just a little something to think about. I've never flipped with a 6-aught hook. I've never had the reason to, but some people have, not me. Your reel. High-speed reels are a must, and there are so many great manufacturers of high-speed reels out there today. I use Daiwa. I like the T-wing system from them. I got a lot of confidence with that, and I really didn't get it from flipping. I got it from throwing casting baits, crankbaiting, and chatterbaiting and things like that, because it increased my distance. You need to have an 8-to-1 gear ratio or higher. There's a couple reasons for that. Number one, it's going to allow you to bring the fish to you faster. And like I said, we want to hit this thing. We want to violently pull it out of its house and bring it to you before it even knows what's going on. I'm sure you've all heard this when it comes to flipping, when it comes to any time that you're fishing. It's always better. You never lost money throwing a hook set and missing, but you sure could miss money if you feel something and you don't set the hook. So again, with flipping, you're gonna be having a lot of what we call swings and misses. You're gonna have this 1.5, 2 ounce weight come flying at your head or at your partner's head. And the easiest way for you to catch all that line and get back in there before you hit somebody, or just to keep you back in the game, is to pick it up as quickly as possible. So the smaller amount of turns, the more line you're pulling in, the more you're back into the game right away. Like I said, the T-wing system on the Daiwa Tadela Type R, it's an 8-to-1 ratio. The T-wing allows that line to fly out of that. When I hit that bail and I pop open, it comes out almost effortlessly. This allows me to use less effort when I'm flipping. And if you're going to be flipping for 6 hours or 7 hours or however long it's going to be that you're out there during a tournament, you're going to get tired fast. These are big rods. There's a lot of weight. So anything that you can do to reduce that fatigue is a bonus. And I like to do it by making sure that, this reel allows me to just effortlessly flip. When paired with the right rod, I'm good to go. The only thing I'm going to tell you is you need to make sure that whatever reel you're using fits your hand. I got baby hands. I ain't gonna lie to anybody. Okay, my last name is Murphy. I'm Irish. We got baby hands. So for me to have some of these manufacturers will make a very large case for their reels. It will cause you to have some abrasion on your hands. It'll feel very uncomfortable. It'll cause you to work more. So get something, that's going. Remember, you don't need a lot of line capacity when flipping because you're not throwing 120 yards. You're throwing, 5, maybe 10 yards most. So the line, having a large reel does not really matter. What matters is the gear ratio and that drag set. And that's another thing I like about the T-wing system and this Daiwa reel. When you set these up, guys, you're going to lock that reel, that drag on that reel all the way down. You twist it till you can't twist it anymore. And the drag system on this Daiwa reel allows you, it's strong enough to allow me to fight the fish with the rod and not have it taking line away from my reel. Now let's get into rods. I use 2 rods almost exclusively when I'm heavy pitching. The first is going to be a JB Custom Rods mat rod. JB Custom Rods, super high-end quality components, custom stuff. You call and you order it, then it's made for you. They've designed a rod they have a number of guys on their staff that are high-level pros. They have a rod that is called the mat rod, and guess what? It's designed for mat flipping. It's a 710 extra heavy, balanced, light, very, very strong. You want an extra heavy rod when you're doing this type of applications. Like I said, we're locking everything down and we're getting violent with these fish. We are popping them up out of there as quickly as we can. But just like anything else, long as possible, but short enough for you to control. We all know that it's easier to, you use a shorter rod when you want accuracy, you use a longer rod when you want distance. Well, on this, we kind of want a blend of both. The longer the rod, the more pressure I can put on that fish, and the more quickly I can pull him out of the slop. But if it's too long, it's tiresome. I'm not accurate with my pitches. And sometimes it's a matter of inches when we're punching these mats. If it's too short, then I can get away with too short, but I'm not going to have as much. I'm going to require me to put a little bit more pressure on somewhere else, whether it's going to be in the reel or the line itself. Now, the other rod that I've used for the last couple of years is the Titan HD from Fitzgerald. If you want to know about, you want solid grass flipping rods or mat punching rods, you look to Florida anglers because that's what these guys do. Number of guys from the Fitzgerald Rods crew who helped design this stuff, all they do is flip. You can take them anywhere in the country, they're going to find something to go flip. So the Titan HD is specifically designed for mat punching. It's got a counterbalance weight system to it, so it feels, when you got it set up properly and you got your reel on there and you're able to start flipping, it doesn't feel like there's anything on there. So therefore you'd have less fatigue. And that's really the key when you create your rod and reel bill for this. You want fast retrieve, you want a length you can handle, extra heavy, and you want it so when you have it set up that it feels like nothing in your hand, because you're gonna get tired quick. This will put a hurting on your elbow real fast if you're gonna commit to this all day. And really, if you're gonna be mat punching, it is an all-day commitment. It's not one of those things where you can do it for an hour or two and then go do something else, because they'll always have that in your head of what could be, and that next pitch could be that 8 or 9 pounder. Let's talk about baits. I use what I call affectionately the Strike King 3. And they have 3 baits that are flipping baits that are designed with some different attributes to them. We're going to talk about them. I use the Rage Menace, the Rodent, and the Structure Bug. The rodent that I use is going to be the 3-inch rodent, not the 3.5. It's not the 4-inch. And the reason why we're using the smaller one, because we always think if we want bigger fish, we put bigger baits out there. But we want this smaller bait, like this rodent here. We want the smaller one because it's got less of a profile, so that when I've got it pegged on there with that tungsten weight, it goes through the grass a lot more smoothly and a lot more quickly. Okay, so the 3 baits, you can see them all lined up here. This was actually the picture from my deck while I was fishing, while I was practicing for the Open down there. This is the Rage Menace. The Rage Menace has got, as you can see, it's got a nice tubular body to it, and 2 long, just these two long appendages where the actual claws of the crayfish would be. And I'm going to show it to you live here. The Rage Menace, nice tube. It's almost like a grub almost, but then it's got these claws here that are going to have a keel system to them, so that when they move through the water, they're going to flip back and forth. And before you use them, of course, you swim apart, but they're going to swim for you like this, and it's going to have a lot of movement as you move it up and down in the vertical column. But because it's just a tube up top, it doesn't have a whole lot of dancing magic all over the place on the outside. And what we're going to try to do, guys, and why I use 3 different baits, is I'm trying to figure out what these fish want. And sometimes it's going to be just a little different presentation that's going to make them bite. So this one's a little bit more subtle, but it's got a lot of kick action when I'm moving up and down. Real thin so it can go through the vegetation quickly. The rodent, very similar to a lot of your standard, almost like a Reaction Innovations type bait, with a little bit thicker claws to it. It's got a nice flat body. All right, nice flat body. Let me see what this is. All right, flat body here. Flat on one side, wide on the other. So again, it's going to have a narrow profile as it goes down through the vegetation. And then we've got claws themselves, which I can customize by removing if I wish. I almost always leave them on there because when I'm throwing this bait, I'm looking for a little more movement. And then I've got some not keeled crayfish claws. And what's good about this bait is, the Rage Menace will still move when you're not moving it, but when this is sitting still underneath the water, it's going to do what it's doing right now. It's going to undulate in the water and give that little subtle dance. And all I got to do is shake it a little bit, and I'm going to have quite a bit of vibration down there. But as I move it up and down in the water column, it's going to flap and look pretty good. Again, small, different look than the Rage Menace. The last one is going to be the Structure Bug. And the Structure Bug, I throw to give them something big, see if they want something big at that time. And the thing about a Structure Bug is the Structure Bug is probably the most versatile plastic or soft plastic bait that Strike King makes. I've used it as a swim jig trailer. I've Texas rigged it. I've used it as a jig trailer. I've thrown it out by itself and just reeled it in and caught fish. And of course, I punch baits, I punch mats with it. It's very similar in its body style to the rodent, but it's got a lot more appendages. It's got 2 long arms that have that rage section to it. So it's going to have a little keel, much like the Menace. So it's going to push a lot of water as it's going down, but it's also got antenna, like a lifelike crayfish. Now, this is a big bait, and this big bait, when it's going through that vegetation, gets hung up more. So we're going to have to team this with some heavier weights. All right. This is also customizable, where if I wanted to, I can start tearing these arms off and tearing these claws off to see if maybe I can adjust those without having to adjust the weight. But essentially, I will have all 3 of these tied up on my deck, and I'll just, each one a separate system, and I'll just keep throwing them until I find out what they want, which one's getting more hits, which one's getting more attention, and then pretty much concentrate more with that. I also like the Strike King baits because they are all coffee scented, so it's just like, I'm sure if you guys remember Beverly Hills Cop, I'm showing my age with that one, I'm sorry. Hiding illegal narcotics and coffee grounds to throw the scent off the dogs. Well, that's the whole point of the coffee scent in these baits, is to throw your scent away from the fish so that they're not picking it up. The other bait that I'll throw, and I throw it because it's a Florida bait that a lot of guys have a lot of success with down there, and if you're not throwing the regional bait while you're somewhere, you're making a mistake, is that Gambler BB cricket. It's very similar in size and stature to the rodent, but it's got no real actually flapping action to it. It's just got some very stiff legs that come out, and it's just a different look. But it's a very successful bait. Again, we're using slimmer profile baits because we want to slide through the mat. There's less bait for to get caught up on. It goes through a lot easier. The various plastic builds that I showed you between the rodent, the bug, and the Menace each provide a different look to the fish under the water. So even if I'm throwing in one area or I'm throwing on a specific mat and I'm not catching them on a Menace, I might throw that bug in there to see if they want something bigger. It might trigger that reaction bite a little bit more, or that extraneous movement. If I want to just let it sit still and then have a little bit more undulation, I'll throw that rodent in there. It's going to move around. I know it's going to move around a lot more, and that might be what gets them to creep over and get curious in what that is. When it comes to colors, I go real simple when I'm pitching, or excuse me, when I'm mat punching, and I use black and blue. I don't really use anything else. The reasons for that: it's highly visible under the canopy. When you're fishing a mat, you're fishing about, I don't know, 1 foot to 2 feet of grass, and then it's empty space underneath, and that's where you're going to catch the fish. Sometimes they'll hit it on the way down, the bass are dug in there, but for the most part, it's going to fall all the way through, and then either on its first way down or on its first way back up is when that fish is going to hit. Regardless, underneath that canopy, it's dark. The easiest thing that they're going to pick up, and that is a dark profile, so black and blue works everywhere. It stands out from the green underside while it still remains very natural, because if you were to look at crayfish species on the eastern seaboard, excuse me for 1 second, at some point in their molt cycle, every crayfish has a black and blue stage. I know that's true here in Virginia. I've seen them in Florida while I'm fishing, and you go and then you reach and you pull up a mat and you'll find a crayfish in there. Black and blue is a color that's going to mimic what they are. Remember, we're not looking for exact. We're looking for yeses or nos. So because so many species of crayfish have a black and blue molt phase, black and blue always works. David Dudley once said that when people asked him about colors, he only used one color, and he used green pumpkin all the time when he's fishing the tour. And the reason for that was that he may go to a lake where some red bug is the color that's going to catch them 90% of the time, but he always knew that green pumpkin would at least catch them 80% of the time. So why bother with variation? It was all up to him and his presentation at that point. And as we all know, he's a very successful fisherman. Punching mats and their weights. You need to, depend upon the vegetation, you need to let the vegetation tell you what you should be using. You can use anywhere from 3/4 ounce all the way up to 2 ounces. Tungsten is a must. The reason being that tungsten is a more dense metal than lead. So the same weight can come in a smaller package than from a lead package. So if I want to throw a 2 ounce lead weight out there, it's going to be huge. I mean, that's the stuff we fish for catfish with. If I'm using a tungsten weight, it's about 1/3 the size, which again will allow my bait to dive through that vegetation a lot more quickly. One of the variations that you can do is you can add a bead for noise. You can place that bead in between the actual tungsten weight itself and the hook, and when it clamps down, it'll push the hook up, but it'll also, the tungsten will hit that glass bead and click, 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 make a little bit of noise. Just something new to think about. I will rig mine up both with and without to see what they want. It's important that you peg your weights. I like to use rubber bobber stoppers, and here I'll show you my Bass Mafia tackle box here. And the reason I like it is because I do not have to take things out of the package. I'm not the guy that's smart enough to look at a hook and tell you what size it is. I like to keep them in the original package so I can just pull out, here's my Hack Attack 4/0. I know exactly what's going on. But I just use these cheap little rubber bobber stops like this on the top of the tungsten weight. And sometimes I'll use it on the bottom just to keep it in place. But one or two will usually get the trick done. So that way I'm keeping that weight pegged. I'm keeping that weight as close to that bait as I can possibly can, because what I don't want is I don't want some separation. If I have separation, then the bait might go down one hole and my tungsten weight's going to go down the other, and then the fish is going to see the weight and not the bait, and nothing's going to happen for me, and I'm going to go home with nothing, which is what I don't want. Essentially, as you experiment, you want the lightest weight possible to get the job done. Meaning I want whatever is going to be the minimum weight to get through that piece of vegetation that I'm fishing at that time. That's what I want to have. The only way to figure that out is through experimentation. Sometimes what you're going to do is manipulate this bait. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit, about shaking it through. When you throw it up there, you might see it sit and start to sink a little bit and get caught up. Well, if you raise your rod tip up and shake a little bit, it'll start moving through. And if you're going to use larger baits, like if you're going to use that structure bug, a structure bug for me is an automatic 1.5 ounce tungsten weight, Strike King tungsten weight, pegged at automatic, because again, that bulkier bait is going to need more weight to go through that same hole. That's something that like the Rage Menace is going to go through, because it just because based on size. The terrain. Okay, let's talk about the terrain. As you can see here, this is one of the shots from my practice while I was down tow. This is one of the nicer days, which means it wasn't one of the tournament days. And from looking at this, you can see that there are, this particular picture in this particular area, and this was on Lake Kissimmee, shows 3 or 4 different types of vegetation, and the choices you're going to have to make to attack it. As you can see here, I've got a pad field. I've got an actual bush that's floating on the pads with a root ball system underneath. I've got some charred up debris that's all kind of lined up here. And then I've got, an open water section, here. The thing is, all of these can hold fish, and all of them might require a little bit different weight system or a different weight setup to fish most effectively. So you need to look and analyze, just like you would with anything else. You need to look and analyze as to, the density of what it is you're getting ready to look at, and then throw something that is going to make it through. If you're going to err on something, err on going a little heavy. And we'll talk about why that's going to be here in a second. But this should paint the picture for you that it's imperative that you have 2 to 3 rods minimum set up when you're punching mats with different weights, so that I can effectively tack each one of these areas with the appropriate weight and the appropriate bait. Here's some examples. I'm not a snake guy, particularly cottonmouths. And again, you can see this was from my practice. I found this guy, and I really didn't like the way he was looking at me the entire time, because snakes are like dolls in your kids' rooms. No matter which part of the room you're in, they're always looking at you. But they have a saying down in Florida that if you find a cottonmouth on on a mat somewhere, there's going to be a bass underneath. I flipped around this guy. He didn't even move, and I didn't take anything underneath him, but I was moving on quickly. Snakes for me are not a good idea. Another photo that I took while I was on the water, and again, you can see that we have several different options here. We've got a area of matted grass. We have, again, another bush and reeds underwater. We have isolated pads, and then we've got a massive pad field. And the area that a lot of people overlook is we've got an open water area in between them. All of them can produce fish. All of them can produce big bass and hold lots of bass. And each one of them is going to be attacked a little bit differently. So when we talk about isolated pads or Kissimmee grass, you can get away with using a lighter weight. That's your 3/4 ounce weight. I particularly use, again, I'll use the Rage Menace, or I'll use the Zoom Speedworm with a 3-ounce weight. I like plastic with a lot of movement, and that Rage Menace, because those claws have got that rage section to it that's kind of keeled, kicks a lot of water, puts a lot of water movement. So even if I wanted to throw it out there and buzz it back to me, it's going to look like a fish coming through the water. What I like to do is, when I find these isolated pads, and I find this, here we go. When I find, let's say I was going to fish this little pad group right here, and what I would do is I'd pick this apart. I'd fish this pad group. I'd fish this group of this group of grass, this group of grass, this pad group. I'd fish them all separately, but maybe on the same cast, because if I could cast past this and then drag it through, work it, drag it through, work it, come back to the boat, I'm going to try to maximize that. But what you do is you drag you throw your bait out there, you let it hit the bottom. Once it hits the bottom and you feel it, you slowly use the rod to kind of drag it back towards this group of pads, and at the bottom they're all be coming out of the same area, so it's going to be like a V. You hit it the V, and then you just let it sit, and you get ready. You wait and you wait and you wait, and it may feel like the most subtle little bite, but a lot of times you'll just feel a pick, and then your line will start moving, and then you're going to want to reel down to it and set the hook as hard as you can and get him up and moving. You can manipulate it a little bit when you're at the bottom. You can let it sit there for a second, and then just kind of, almost like you're drop shotting with a 3/4 ounce weight. Give your rod a little shake, give it a little bit of movement. But remember, depending on kind of bait you're using, some baits are going to move more than others. So that might be a little bit of an exercise in futility. Heavy vegetation like hyacinth or debris or big sections of matted grass and reeds, when you throw it out there, you throw that bait out there, a lot of times you'll see it and it'll land on the grass mat itself, and then you can kind of manipulate it so it goes through. And it's almost kind of weird. The first couple of times that you do it, it's going to feel very foreign, and you're not going to know what's going on. When you finally do get it, you'll feel it, and you'll feel it kind of slowly go through, and then once it's gained enough momentum or it's cleared the canopy and starts going down, it'll start taking line from you. So you're going to hit that spool, you're going to cast out, you're going to stop it with your thumb when it gets up top, and you're going to kind of just gently shake it, and as you feel it come out, you just ease up on the tension on your thumb, and then once it's all the way through, let it go until it's the bottom, and then immediately stop and click. So I've got it locked. Then I'm going to want to go ahead and kind of bring it up to the top of the canopy. And you do one of two things. Either bring it up, pump it, and let it drop, or bring it up, and sometimes I'll hold it right underneath the bottom of the canopy, and I'll just shake it. Like it's just like it's an animal clinging to the bottom of that canopy. And that a lot of times will trigger strikes. You really need to pay attention, particularly in Florida or any of the southern, Florida stream bass for the most part. They're highly affected by pressure and weather, mostly pressure. So when the pressure changes, whether it's good or bad, comes through, they are usually going to clam up. They're going to get stressed. It's almost identical to like heavy fishing pressure, but for a lot of times, if a cold front runs through in Florida during this time period, these guys are going to just clam up. Doesn't mean they're not catchable. You just may have to be more patient. You may have to spend more time. I have a little system, and we're going to go through it here in the next couple slides on how I like to attack these things. But you may have to, instead of pumping 1 or 2 times before you exit and then go back and pitch to another section, you may have to pump it 10 times. You may have to let it sit and count to 5, almost like real wintertime jerk baiting. It can be infuriating. It can be stressful. It can make you want to pull your hair out. But then you sack a 6 or 7 pounder, and your one fish could beat the next guy's 5 total that he's been whacking them on all day in some other section of the lake. That's what you're looking for when we're punching mats. We're not looking for small fish. We're looking for the big guys. We're looking for you to be able to win a tournament with 3 fish and beat everyone else's 5. That's the goal, and this is the way it's going to get done. We're going to analyze your terrain and let the terrain tell you what to use. So if I've got some spaces, I can get away with lighter weight. If it's heavier, obviously I want to use a heavier weight. So again, floating debris. Most mats will hold multiple areas to attack. You're going to want to keep it simple, okay? Use the weight for when you're looking at this. You've got several areas here that are going to be can be penetrated with different levels of, or different weights. All right. So I've got an more open space here that I could probably get through with an 1.25 ounces. I've got some heavy stuff up here that I'm not getting through with anything less than 2, and you want to fish this. So I've got debris, I've got the snake, and I got some hyacinth stuff over here that, again, I might be able to get through with an 1.25 ounces, or I might not be able to get through with anything less than 2. And I got an open water area up here where I can get a 3/4 ounce all the way through. My suggestion to you is this. If I'm looking at this, I'm like, man, that's going to take 2 ounces to get through. I'm going to throw 2 to all of these. And I'm going to control my rate of fall by just putting a little pressure on the reel as it goes up. Once I throw it to my target, pressure with the reel and slow it down as it's going through. All right. You're going to, the thing about Florida is you could be out there on the front of your boat and it's 70 degrees and you're having a great day and you're texting all your buddies back here in Virginia when there's 2 feet of snow and telling them how much it sucks to be there. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a storm front comes through that it drops, the ambient temperature drops 20 degrees and you are just sitting there freezing again. You've got to be aware of this, and you cannot let that mentally get in your head and say that these fish are uncatchable anymore. They're always catchable. You just have to manipulate things a little bit more slowly, and you have to be a little bit more deliberate, and you have to be painstakingly accurate with what you're doing. What I like to do when I'm fishing under ideal conditions, I like to punch, pump, come out, and then pitch. So I will throw it through, get it to punch the vegetation, pump it 2-3 times. I'm then out, reeling it in, and going to my next section. And my next section might not be more than like 5-6 inches over. Because that, if I hit this area and the fish is facing that way, well, I'm going to have to put it over here for him to see it. And most likely he's not going to turn around. These guys are pretty stable and they feel really safe underneath there. So they're not going to be turning around with the head on the swivel as often as people think, but you may have to drop it right in front of them. You're going to, again, it's all about experimentation, guys. It's all about getting in there, throwing some baits around and seeing what works. Let the fish tell you what they want. Let these mats tell you what they want, and then take copious notes and make sure you're filing things away in your head. Because once I find an area that I'm catching fish on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to go around that lake and just look for areas that are similar. So here's hyacinth. Hyacinth, it can be, Kissimmee had hyacinth all over the place. It's very thick and it's got a very large root ball underneath it. And for that reason, bass like to hide underneath. It's a great ambush point for them. It's also a place of safety for them. You got to be patient when you're fishing hyacinth, because that weight, when you throw it up on there, even if you start to shake it, it might go down a little bit and then it might just get caught up. Again, err on the side of being heavy. Throw a 2 until you get a hang of it. Then you can go to a 1.05 or 1.25 ounces. And remember, again, like we said earlier, a lot's going to depend upon the size of your bait. If you use the baits that I've suggested to you, I typically will fish 90% of the time with that 1.25 ounces. 1.25 ounces will get that rage menace and that rodent through most vegetation that I've had to deal with, particularly with some manipulation. If I'm throwing that structure bug, it's got to be 1.5 ounces, 2 ounces every single time. If you're going to throw heavy, not a big deal. Just control that rate of fall with your thumb, and sometimes just let it go. Sometimes that straight super fall that's right in front of them triggers that reaction bite, and now bam, it's on, and you're going to want to reel in. Toss it in there, work it through, let it fall, click, so that I've got my drag ready to rock and roll, and any little thing I feel, pull, whack them, walk away, and reel and get them up and out of there as quickly as possible. Like I said earlier, you can pump the bait for the feeling of the bottom of the canopy, so you can have it'll kind of come through slow. You feel it bumping around, all of a sudden, woof, it'll take off and you'll lose line. And all of a sudden it'll stop. And you pick it up, you can come up to, you feel resistance and just let it shake right there. A lot of times that'll hit a nerve on some fish and get them to hit. Another thing you can do too, if you're looking for productive mats, find bluegill. Just find, if there's bluegill there, there's going to be bass there. Anywhere there's bluegill, there's bass. So again, bluegill, bass, imitative fish hanging out in the bottom. Remember, you're fishing for 5 bites in a tournament. You don't, if you're going out in the tournament, if you're fishing tournament level and you're going to go out there and try to fish for numbers, and you're going to be satisfied with numbers of fish, you're probably not going to win a lot. You need to fish for big fish. You need to get 5 bites, and you need to have a high success ratio, which means you need to practice, 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 and you need to set hook early and often. With mat punching, it's the type of thing that you have to commit to. And you, if any of you watched the FLW tour this last week, I think it was on day one when Shiniki Fukai had, I think he was in second place going into day two. He said that his one regret from his day was that he didn't stay committed to punching. That, you know, the guys, the dude who was leading, and his name escapes me right now because, again, I went to Virginia Tech, so I'm not the brightest dude in the world. But the guy who was winning committed to flipping all day long. He had the big stick in his hand, and Shin did not. He started off flipping, and then he got an idea that he was going to go try some reaction baiting with, I think he was throwing a rattle trap, and he caught fish, but they weren't the right size. And at the end of the day, he went back to flipping, and he caught a couple of good ones that put him that made his weight bigger. But he was like, yeah, I should have stayed committed to the flip and bite all day because that's where the bigger fish were coming. So you have to fish like, you know, I've got a minute left in my day, and this is my last cast. You've always got to fish like it's my last cast. That being said, this is tiring. This will wear on you mentally. This will wear on you physically. Don't be afraid to take a break. Don't be afraid to turn around and just throw your 2-ounce weight as far as you can throw it to straighten out your line and get everything reordered and get your head reordered again. Because, you know, if you're doing this right, it's intense. I'm focused. I'm ready to rock and roll. My brain at some point is going to start shutting down, and I need to hit that reset button as often as I can. You also have to have plans for baits to use in between mats while you're moving around. Because and we'll look at this nice picture of what we have here. I've got pads and hyacinth, isolated stuff, more isolated stuff, and then I've got these open areas. And these open areas, particularly here, and this looks like hydrilla mixed with pads. These open areas can hold fish, can hold active fish at any time. So while I'm punching here, if I had my boat and I was going to go here and here, and it looks like I'm playing tic-tac-toe at this point, and work my way around and hit these areas. As I'm working around this, if my co-angler, I'd be telling them, be throwing off the back of the boat here, and they can do one of two things: either try to clean up right behind me and pay attention to the areas that I'm hitting, or they can try to hit this open space and see if they can get a reaction bait. And they're going to do that with a Senko, a fluke, a chatterbait, or a swim jig. But as I'm moving around and I get ready to go to this next mat, the first couple of casts I'm making here, I'm going to throw a Senko or a fluke or like a swimming caffeine shad that I'm just going to kind of wake back to me to see if there's any active fish looking to ambush stuff in there. So don't pass up these open areas, or a frog even, man. If I can get away with fishing with a frog all day long everywhere in the country, I would. There's nothing I enjoy more than frog fishing. But do not overlook these. I know we're targeting mats, but don't overlook the areas in between mats, particularly with this. If you're not throwing these guys, if you're not throwing that Senko or the Strike King Ocho, which is going to give you a little bit different look, then you're missing out. You need to have this in your arsenal. It is a bait that is extremely versatile and easy to fish. So again, open spaces, throw those baits, throw those, you know, reaction bait, a swim jig or a KVD swim jig, or that pure poison chatterbait. Those are gonna get your reaction bites in between your areas. That way I'm maximizing my fishing time. I'm not just hopping from spot to spot and missing and, you know, potentially not catching these fish that could be hanging out. All right. As you're moving through, look for punch out holes. When you pull one of these bass up out of a bed, or excuse me, out of a grass mat, it's going to leave a large hole. That's an area where someone has recently extracted a bass. If you have found an area that's got those, I'm going to tell you to move on out. It's most likely very recent. That person's probably fished it the exact same style that you're getting ready to or you're trying to. There's no point in wasting your time. Go find some fresh area. Do not ever be afraid to go as shallow as possible. There's no such thing as too shallow when you're punching mats. This style and this type of fishing can test your patience, and it's kind of a do or die thing. You got to commit to it, and you may come in, you know, it's like swinging for the fences. You may strike out, or you may hit a grand slam that wins the World Series. If you're reading conditions properly and you are taking notes and you are paying attention and staying mentally focused, you can have some of the biggest sacks of fish that you'll ever have in a tournament. Bites when you're doing this type of fishing can be anywhere, pretty much just like any other type of fishing. Soft plastics, it can be very subtle. It can feel like a bluegill, or it can be someone taking it and running with it and hitting as hard as possible. The key is set the hook and get that fish moving up towards you as quickly as possible and back to the boat. Ideally, you want it up out of the hole, you want its tail on the water, and you want it flipping, and you want to reel them in and pop them into the boat as quickly as you can. We don't want to play. We don't want to have him run around down there. And we certainly don't want an opportunity for an alligator to come and snatch him off the end of your line. So get him up, get him to you, get him in the boat as quickly as possible. I strongly suggest that you log your catches and the conditions around them, so that when you are out on the water during that tournament day, and particularly in the South, when we have a massively quick changing condition, you have it already logged somewhere. I can open my book and say, all right, it's 55 degrees right now. The barometer is dropping. It's in January, and the water temperature is 58 degrees. Last year, I had this exact same condition, and this is where I found them. It's going to allow you to kind of dial yourself in a little bit more quickly rather than playing the guessing game the whole day. And practice, guys. I mean, we have snow here, and I'll stand on my front porch and flip stuff into the snow underneath trees as much as I can, just so I can become accurate. So I can get the motion down and get some muscle memory. Flipping small distances accurately is the key to mat punching. And like I said, sometimes it's a game of inches. If you're not putting it right on that fish's head under a stressful condition, he's not going to bite. As a follow-up, February 24th at 9:00. Josh Douglas and Seth Fighter, who is Josh is a high-level opens pro. Seth is a Bassmaster Elite Series pro and a successful one, are going to be doing pitching and punching shallow vegetation. It's going to pretty much take the information that I've talked about today, kind of amp it up another level. You're going to have two great minds putting their information in there. And it's going to be, this is kind of the introduction. That's going to be the more nitty-gritty advanced class. They're going to show you some different things that they do. Throughout the year, there's going to be free webinars from Navionics. The easiest way and the best way for you to find out when they are and where they're going is to check this website, navionics.com, and just click on webinar and look at the webinar schedule. All of them are free. They cover a variety of topics from boating, diving, spear fishing, our bass fishing, the saltwater fishing, product reviews, etc. They're all free, so it doesn't cost you a dime. And thank you very much, guys, for attending this. Again, I don't know if you can tell, but I don't really shut up very easily. I kind of keep talking even when I probably should just move on. But anyway, I really enjoyed this stuff. I enjoy interacting with you guys. Please hit me up either through this email address or on my my Facebook account. That's Murph Angler. I'm happy to share what little I know. Keep in mind that this is all free advice, so essentially it is worth nothing. Now let's take a look at the chat and see what we got. What Senko and other baits do you use, the blue and black, two or other colors? Good question, David Butler. With Senkos, hey, thank you, Will. With my Senko, there's one color that I use across the country, and I've always had success with it. There's never been an area where I haven't caught bass on this color Senko. It's really great on tidal fisheries because the color is somewhat similar to what a juvenile blue crab is going to look like. But I mean, I've caught them anywhere from, Rhode Island all the way down to Florida, and that color is going to be Bama bug. It's kind of like a, and Daniel, I'll get to your question here in a minute. It's kind of a combination of like a bluish green with some green and emerald flake in it and some blue flake. Again, it's not black and blue, but it's dark and it's got some blue to it. If you're a tidal fisherman, that's a deadly, deadly color. Daniel, success punching tubes. I don't have a lot of confidence in tubes. I have confidence in tubes on structure pitching, not punching tubes through vegetation. And I don't think it's because they wouldn't work. It's because I'm so confident in the Rage Menace and the rodent and the bug setup that I don't feel a need to go to anything else. Which, I mean, that's great for me. It allows me, I mean, heck, I can go to Walmart and pick up Strike King stuff. But that if you're going to invest in anything, that structure bug can pretty much do anything for, I mean, I've swum it as a swim jig, and it's got great action and it's caught fish. So, punching tubes, I don't do a whole lot of it. I do it around boat docks and around like laydowns and stuff up here in the mid-Atlantic, and I've had success with that. But for the most part, no, down south, I like these other things. You got it, Daniel, anytime. Are there any other questions? Because I've got 6 minutes, and all my kids are upstairs and they're asleep, so they're not here bugging all of us, and I love them to death. But yeah, they would be sitting here talking to everyone. Let's take a look at this Q&A question. At what point do I change to a jig? Good question, Robert Bohannon. Are you talking specifically in Florida or in general? For the I'll answer it this way. For the most part. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that. I don't switch to a jig at all when I'm punching mats. I will use a jig in Florida in May when things have thinned out a little bit. And I'll use it almost exclusively in thinner grass areas and around reeds. But jigs, a lot of people use jigs. Jigs are great if we remember when we've gone back to those isolated pad fields that are around the like on this little area right here. A jig would be wonderful for that. I have not seen any. I can catch fish throwing just straight plastics right there, and yeah, I leave jigs alone for the most part when I'm fishing in Florida. But a very good question. Do I use punch skirts? From Brian. Yes, I do. I usually make my own. I was a fly fishing guide for a few years up here in Virginia, so I know I've got a lot of leftover pieces from my fly tying stuff, and I'll make my own punch skirts. I don't really know if it makes that much of a difference. It's something new and different out there, but for the most part, like I said, I really feel my degree's in biology, and I studied whatever, gosh, back in the 90s, there wasn't a whole lot of information on bass behavior, but there was on general fish behavior. And for the most part, I strongly believe in yeses and nos. So, we're not looking to really match anything. That punch skirt will offer a little something different. I think I can offer something a little different by changing whatever my plastic is going to be. Today's plastics are extremely complicated. But that being said, yeah, I do throw a punch skirt on there from time to time, and I catch fish with a punch skirt. Any other questions that we may have? How do I vary my approach when fishing the Potomac from Ken? I kind of didn't want to share this with Potomac fishermen because I think that this is a highly underused and overlooked way, Ken, to fish for bass here on the Potomac. And I'll use a particular area as an example. I'm assuming you're familiar with the Potomac, Ken. I'm assuming you're familiar with Pamunkey Creek, not the actual river side of it, but when you go in, and there's almost always a very large grass bed there that most fishermen, when they come into it, will sit there and say, it's too thick. I'm not going to waste my time. I can't get through that. Well, those fishermen have not punched in Florida. The DNR shocking studies of that particular grass bed routinely produce 6-7 pound bass. I think that you can go ahead and use your punching techniques that work in Florida to punch through that and get in that last little section and whack those guys and get them out of there very, very quickly with almost the exact same baits. The nice thing about tidal fisheries in the Mid-Atlantic is that there are so many color variations that work because not only do you have fish species, but you have that blue crab. That blue crab is that juvenile blue crab, particularly in the molting stage. These bass will eat it up. David Butler, I wish I had some Texas fishing advice for you. I have not fished Texas since I was 12 years old, and I was very happy to just throw a Mr. Twister out and reel it back in and catch something. So I do not have any specific advice for Texas because I don't have any experience down there. I will tell you this, on the 24th, when Seth and Josh talk, they do have Texas fishing advice, and they will be more than happy to share that with you. It's my understanding that Texas lakes are deeper, and they don't have the same type of matted vegetation that we do here on the East Coast. So again, tune in for that or hit me up. I'll be more than happy to ask around. I got a lot of, obviously, the guys that I travel with, are guys that fish the centrals and the northerns and the southerns, and they've got some Texas experience. I'll be happy to ask them if they do anything different for Texas. Just come in and talk to me on Facebook, and we'll go from there. How long do I stay on a mat before moving to another one? From Christian. Christian, it depends on the conditions. If it's a very stressed day, I'll spend a lot of time. If it's perfect conditions where it's ideal, 2 days after a front and it's in the 70s and the water temperature is rising and I'm seeing movement, I'll pitch, and I'll almost stay high on that trolling motor. So it's really gonna depend. Do I bypass vegetation that looks like it's beginning to die in the water? No, Douglas, I don't. And we gotta go, but I'll answer that real quick. I don't bypass vegetation that looks like it's beginning to die in the water, particularly if it looks like it's beginning to die, because that attracts a lot of zooplankton to that area, because they're going to feed on the detritus. And what feeds on zooplankton is going to be bait fish, and what feeds on bait fish are going to be bluegill, and what feeds on bluegill and bait fish, that's going to be bass. So I know a lot of people like to stay away from that dead, dying stuff. I don't, because I caught fish there. So that's just something to think about. Bass will sit anywhere. Christopher Harms, I've never punched, so I don't have a punching rod. Can you use a Dobbins 8.7 mag heavy until you bought a punching rod? Yeah, dude. You can use whatever you want, as long as it's capable of as long as you're capable of controlling it, and B, and as long as it's capable of handling what you're throwing, you're good to go. What does it mean when I'm answering a question live? That means that I have read your question and I've just clicked on a little button that says I'd like to answer this live. That's all. David Butler reads almost the exact same thing. Almost the exact same thing. I like to target reeds that are going to be a little bit more bunched, however, and I'll throw, before I go into them, I'll throw a Senko or a fluke on the outside of them. Last one here, guys, from Brian. Do you change weight based on depth or just cover? I don't care about depth that much. I'll try to use my Navionics contour maps before I get started to see where some of the deeper water is, particularly in Florida, because they're just big bowls. And that little subtle difference in the depth underneath might be the change that holds fish, particularly in stress times. But no, I change my weight based upon the cover almost exclusively, because all I want to do is I want the minimum weight to try to go down and through. So the depth although they're also shallow there, it doesn't really matter. But I still do look at that contours, just because I want to see those little subtle underwater differences that are going to allow me, that I might put those fish, fish relate to change. So changes in depth might hold some fish for me. So I might, particularly in stress times, like I said, that's going to allow me, I'll have the advantage over someone else who's just looking at their stuff. Anyway, guys, Murph Angler on Facebook, or send me an email. I'll be happy to answer anything. Please follow me throughout the year. I'm going to be doing at least, 3 or 4 more of these. And I'm going to have some special guests with my future ones coming up, some guys you may know. So again, thank you all for attending. I enjoyed it. Hit me up, and let's all catch fish together this year, guys. All right. Thank you to Navionics and for Bass Mafia for allowing me to do this today. Appreciate it. Have a good night, all.